4th of February, 1994, Alexandria, Virginia. The Eastern District Courthouse receives a plea agreement stamped at 10:47 in the morning. In the file, a single charge, conspiracy to commit espionage. The defendant, a career intelligence officer, agrees to life without possibility of parole. Prosecutors note identities compromised, sources executed. The public expects such cases to end with maximum terms every time. The record tells a different story. Over 3 decades, 7 officers connected to the Central Intelligence Agency would face federal courts. Sentences would range from 30 months to life. Some would plead, others would face trial. Evidence would vary: cash drops, notebooks with true names, server logs, phone records. The Espionage Act draws no bright line between betrayal for money and disclosure to journalists. Courts would weigh harm, proof, mitigation, and deterrence. Today, the question remains: when secrets move, how should judges measure the damage? A clerk opens a sealed envelope in a windowless courtroom. Counsel sit behind tables marked with classification tags. Outside, reporters wait for a public summary. Inside, a judge reviews a Classified Information Procedures Act order. The law, codified at Title 18, United States Code, Sections 793 through 794 and 798, governs what juries may see when national defense information is at stake. SIPA balances the Sixth Amendment right to confront evidence against the government's need to protect sources and methods. Prosecutors file notice of their intent to introduce classified material. Defense attorneys argue for access, for context, for the ability to challenge damage claims. The court rules on substitutions, summaries, admissions, redactions. What jurors hear shapes what judges weigh at sentencing. Life without possibility of parole is the statutory maximum for espionage under Section 794, when the conduct involves intent to harm the United States or aid a foreign power. Lesser charges under 793, gathering or transmitting national defense information, carry up to 10 years per count. Prosecutors often add obstruction, false statements, or computer fraud charges. Sentencing guidelines consider the volume and classification level of material, the recipient, and documented harm. Mitigation includes prior service, family circumstances, cooperation, health conditions, and expert testimony about psychological stressors. Courts also consider deterrence, the need to signal consequences to those with clearances. Appeal posture describes where a case sits in the federal system. Direct appeal follows conviction and sentence, testing legal errors and sufficiency of evidence. Post-conviction relief under Section 2255 challenges constitutional violations or ineffective assistance. Clemency, controlled by the President at the federal level, is rare. It requires a petition to the Office of the Pardon Attorney, review by the Deputy Attorney General, and a presidential decision. Grants are sparse. Between 2000 and 2020, presidents commuted fewer than 100 federal sentences per term on average. For national security offenses, the number drops to nearly 0. Special housing units and special administrative measures govern detention for inmates deemed high risk. SHU restricts movement, contact, and program access. SAMs, authorized by the Attorney General, limit phone calls, mail, and visits to prevent further intelligence activity. Both are documented in Bureau of Prisons records and referenced in court filings when defense counsel argue about conditions. These terms will recur. They mark the difference between general population and isolation, between routine incarceration and monitored silence. 4th of February, 1994. The plea colloquy in United States versus Aldrich Ames lasts less than an hour. The defendant, a Central Intelligence Agency counterintelligence officer, admits to conspiracy to commit espionage. He identifies the Soviet Union and later Russia as recipients. He confirms he received over $2.7 million. He acknowledges providing the identities of human sources working for the United States. The government states that at least 10 sources were executed. The judge accepts the plea. The sentence, life without possibility of parole. Ames's conduct spanned 9 years, from 1985 to 1994. He volunteered information to the KGB in exchange for cash. He passed notes during embassy meetings, used dead drops, and met handlers in foreign cities. The money funded home renovations, luxury cars, and credit card payments. Financial analysis by the Federal Bureau of Investigation flagged unexplained deposits. Bank records showed Ames depositing hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, far beyond his government salary. Investigators traced the pattern: Soviet payments followed by American purchases. The tradecraft failed when lifestyle outpaced plausible income. The Department of Justice announced the plea in a press release. The FBI detailed the investigation in a public damage assessment. No names of executed sources appeared in open filings, but officials confirmed fatalities in classified briefings to Congress. The case became the anchor for all future espionage prosecutions. It demonstrated the maximum consequence: life imprisonment with no chance of release. It also showed the government's willingness to accept a plea when the evidence was overwhelming and cooperation limited. Ames provided some operational details in debriefings, but declined to assist in identifying other moles. His cooperation did not reduce his sentence. Today, Ames remains in Bureau of Prisons custody. His case file is sealed. His name appears in training materials for intelligence officers, a warning about greed and access. Courts cite him when defense attorneys argue that their client's conduct was less severe. Prosecutors invoke him when they seek decades-long terms for lesser breaches. He is the extreme case, the outlier. Every national security sentencing begins with the question, how far below Ames should this defendant fall? The expectation was simple: betray human sources, receive life. The reality proved more complex. If Ames represents the top of the range, where do courts place officers who leak to journalists, who retain classified notes, who transfer cyber tools? The answer lies in the next 25 years of prosecutions, in the interplay of evidence, harm claims, and mitigation. If this is the ceiling, the floor is still being negotiated. A corrections officer at the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, Oregon, notices coded letters leaving an inmate's cell. The inmate, Harold James Nicholson, is serving a sentence for espionage. Convicted in 1997 in the District of Oregon, Nicholson had sold classified information to Russian intelligence while employed by the Central Intelligence Agency. His original sentence exceeded 20 years. The letters, however, suggest ongoing activity. Investigators open a new case. Nicholson, a decorated officer who trained recruits at the farm, began cooperating with Russian intelligence in 1994. He photographed classified documents and passed them during overseas meetings. He received cash payments. The FBI arrested him in 1996 as he prepared to travel abroad. A search recovered undeveloped film and computer disks containing classified information. He pleaded guilty. The court sentenced him to more than 23 years. While imprisoned, Nicholson continued his relationship with Russian intelligence. He used his son as a courier. The son traveled to foreign cities, met Russian handlers, collected cash, and returned to the United States. Nicholson instructed his son via coded messages in letters and phone calls. Prison monitors flagged the communications. The FBI initiated surveillance. Agents observed the son's travel patterns, photographed meetings, and intercepted payments. In 2011, prosecutors filed a new indictment in the District of Oregon. Nicholson and his son pleaded guilty to conspiracy to act as agents of a foreign government. The court sentenced Nicholson to an additional 96 months to run consecutive to his original term. His total time now approaches 3 decades. His son received a shorter sentence and has since been released. Nicholson remains in custody. Bureau of Prisons records list him as serving a term into the 2030s. The case demonstrated a principle: incarceration does not end culpability. An inmate with access to communication can still conspire. The government argued that Nicholson's continued activity warranted enhanced punishment. Defense counsel noted his limited ability to access new secrets from prison. The court sided with prosecutors, citing deterrence and the need to prevent others from using family members as intermediaries. The tradecraft failed when prison mail monitors and financial surveillance converged. The son's travel patterns were too regular. The cash transfers were too large to ignore. If Ames showed the maximum term for an active officer who betrays sources, Nicholson's case raised a new question. Should courts add years for post-conviction conspiracies conducted from behind bars? The answer was yes. The precedent stood. An inmate who recruits outsiders to continue espionage faces consecutive sentences. The next question: how will courts treat officers who leak electronically, who leave digital traces instead of cash trails? 22nd of June, 2017. Federal agents arrest Kevin Patrick Mallory at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Mallory, a former Central Intelligence Agency officer and defense contractor with top-secret clearance, had recently returned from Shanghai. In his luggage, agents find electronic devices. Forensic analysis reveals a covert communications application and deleted messages. The messages show tasking from Chinese intelligence and Mallory's responses. He had agreed to provide classified information in exchange for $25,000. The investigation began when Mallory contacted former colleagues, asking questions about current operations. Counterintelligence officers noted the pattern. Surveillance teams observed his travel. When he returned from China, agents interviewed him. He lied about the purpose of his trip and the contents of his devices. Technicians recovered deleted files. The messages were clear. Chinese handlers had asked for specific documents. Mallory had photographed classified materials and transmitted them via the secure app. He believed the deletions would hide his conduct. The metadata proved otherwise. Prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia charged Mallory with espionage and false statements. The case proceeded to trial under CPA procedures. The court reviewed classified evidence in camera, issued protective orders, and allowed summaries for the jury. Witnesses testified about the sensitivity of the material Mallory had accessed. Damage assessments described potential harm to operations and sources. Mallory's defense centered on financial stress. He faced mounting debts, a failed business, and medical bills. His attorneys presented his military service record and family circumstances. The jury convicted him on all counts. At sentencing in May of 2019, the court imposed 20 years. The judge cited the volume of classified material, the identity of the foreign recipient, and the defendant's deliberate efforts to conceal his actions. Mallory filed a direct appeal. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals reviewed the sufficiency of the evidence, the trial court's evidentiary rulings, and the application of sentencing guidelines. In a published opinion, the appellate panel affirmed both the conviction and the sentence. The court found no error in the CIPA procedures, no constitutional violation in the jury instructions, and no abuse of discretion in the term imposed. Mallory remains in Bureau of Prisons custody. His projected release date extends into the 2030s. His case is notable for the digital evidence, a covert app designed to evade detection, deleted messages that were recovered, and financial records linking payments to classified transfers. The tradecraft failed because deletion does not mean destruction. Forensic tools can retrieve fragments, metadata, and timestamps. The contrast is stark. Spies imagine perfect security. Prosecutors show juries the recoverable trail. Should digital artifacts weigh as heavily as paper documents or more, given the volume and speed of transmission? 18th of January, 2018. Federal agents intercept Jerry Chun-Shing Lee at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Lee, a former Central Intelligence Agency case officer, had been living in Hong Kong. Agents execute a search warrant on his hotel room. Inside, they find 2 small notebooks. The notebooks contain true names of human sources, operational details, meeting locations, and internal codes. The entries are handwritten. Some pages list questions that match known Chinese intelligence debriefings. Lee is arrested. Lee worked for the Central Intelligence Agency from 1994 to 2007. He resigned and moved to Hong Kong, where he operated a tobacco business. In 2010, Chinese intelligence began systematically dismantling the agency's network in China. Sources disappeared, communications ceased, internal investigators suspected a penetration. They reviewed personnel with access to the compromised operations. Lee's name appeared on multiple lists. Surveillance began. In 2012, undercover officers approached Lee in Hong Kong. They posed as Chinese intelligence operatives and offered him money to continue cooperating. Lee agreed. He met them multiple times. The meetings were recorded. In the recordings, Lee discussed his past cooperation with Chinese intelligence and his willingness to provide additional information. He accepted cash payments. The investigation continued for years. When Lee traveled to the United States in 2018, agents moved. Prosecutors in the Eastern District of Virginia charged Lee with conspiracy to gather and deliver national defense information. The notebooks were the primary evidence. Forensic analysis of his electronic devices revealed deleted files, requests from Chinese handlers, and Lee's responses. The defense argued that the notebooks were old, that Lee had kept them as personal records, and that he had not actively passed them to foreign intelligence after his resignation. The government countered with the undercover recordings and the financial transfers. Lee pleaded guilty in May of 2019. At sentencing in November of 2019, the court imposed 228 months, approximately 19 years. The judge noted the gravity of compromising human sources, the extended duration of Lee's cooperation with Chinese intelligence, and the documented harm to operations. The sentence paralleled Mallory's in length, reflecting similar conduct. Both officers transferred identities and operational details to the People's Republic of China. Both sought financial gain, and both attempted to conceal their actions. Lee remains in Bureau of Prisons custody. His projected release date is in the late 2030s. The tradecraft failed because Lee retained operational notebooks. Intelligence officers are trained to destroy notes, to compartmentalize information, and to avoid creating permanent records. Lee kept detailed logs. He stored them in luggage. When investigators searched his possessions, the evidence was immediate and undeniable. The notebooks listed names, dates, and locations. Prosecutors did not need to rely on circumstantial proof. The documents spoke for themselves. The case raised a question. When identities appear in a defendant's handwriting, how much uncertainty remains about harm? Prosecutors presented damage assessments describing the collapse of networks. Defense attorneys challenged the causation. Could the government prove that Lee's notebooks, rather than other penetrations or surveillance, caused the losses? The court found the evidence sufficient. The presence of true names and the timing of the network failures supported the inference. The sentence reflected the seriousness of human source compromise. If Ames received life for similar conduct in an earlier era, Lee's 19 years suggested that courts now calibrate punishment below the maximum when cooperation is partial and the defendant eventually pleads guilty. 26th of January 2015. A jury in the Eastern District of Virginia convicts Jeffrey Alexander Sterling, a former Central Intelligence Agency officer, of 9 counts: unauthorized disclosure of national defense information, unauthorized retention, mail fraud, and obstruction of justice. The case centers on Operation Merlin, a covert program to pass flawed nuclear weapon designs to Iran. Prosecutors allege Sterling leaked details of the operation to a journalist. The journalist published a book describing the program. Sterling is arrested, tried, and convicted. No direct evidence, no emails quoting classified text, no recordings of Sterling reading documents is presented. The government's case rests on phone records, email metadata, and timing. Sterling worked for the Central Intelligence Agency from 1993 to 2002. He sued the agency, alleging racial discrimination. The lawsuit was dismissed. After leaving, Sterling contacted a journalist who covered intelligence matters. Phone records showed dozens of calls between Sterling and the journalist during the period when the journalist was researching the book. Email metadata shows exchanges. The timing of the calls aligns with chapters in the published book that describe Operation Merlin. Prosecutors argue the correlation is proof. Defense attorneys argue it is coincidence that Sterling spoke to the journalist about his discrimination case, not classified operations. The trial proceeds under CIPA. The court hears classified testimony in closed sessions. Summaries are provided to the jury. The journalist refuses to testify, citing reporter's privilege. The court does not compel testimony. The government proceeds without direct witness confirmation. The jury convicts on all counts. Sterling is sentenced in May of 2015 to 42 months. The Fourth Circuit affirms the conviction on appeal. The appellate opinion addresses the sufficiency of circumstantial evidence, the boundaries of reporters' privilege, and the application of the Espionage Act to disclosures to journalists. Sterling served his sentence and was released. His case remains controversial. Advocacy groups argue that the prosecution targeted a whistleblower, that the government used the Espionage Act to silence criticism of a flawed operation. Prosecutors respond that Sterling disclosed classified details of a sensitive program, endangering sources and methods. The court sided with the government. The sentence of 42 months is notably lower than Mallory's 20 years or Lee's 19, reflecting differences in the charges and the nature of the recipient. Leaking to a journalist, even one who publishes, is treated differently than selling to a foreign intelligence service. The tradecraft failed not through physical documents, but through patterns. Sterling did not hand over classified files. He spoke. The calls were logged. The emails were archived. The timing was documented. Prosecutors built a mosaic: contact, research, publication. The jury accepted the inference. The appellate court upheld the verdict. The case set a precedent. Metadata can sustain a national security conviction when the pattern is strong enough. The Sterling case asks, if proof is mostly circumstantial, phone records aligning with a publication timeline, how should courts calibrate punishment and deterrence? The answer, in Sterling's case, was a term measured in years, not decades. The sentence acknowledged the seriousness of the disclosure while recognizing the absence of foreign intelligence involvement and the defendant's motivation. Sterling argued he was exposing a flawed program. The court treated the disclosure as criminal, not protected speech. The balance between whistleblower claims and national security enforcement remains contentious. Sterling's 42 months reflect one court's answer. Other districts, other juries might weigh the same evidence differently. 23rd of October, 2012. John. Kiriakou appears in the Eastern District of Virginia for a plea hearing. Kiriakou, a former Central Intelligence Agency officer, had served in counterterrorism operations. After leaving the agency, he became a commentator, speaking to journalists about interrogation practices. In one conversation, he disclosed the identity of a covert officer to a journalist. The journalist passed the name to defense attorneys representing detainees at Guantanamo Bay. The disclosure violated the Intelligence Identities Protection Act. Kiriakou also made false statements to the publication's review board. He pleaded guilty to one count of disclosing the identity of a covert agent. He was sentenced to 30 months. Kiriakou's case differs from Mallory, Lee, and Sterling in recipient and intent. He did not sell information to a foreign power. He did not seek financial gain from the disclosure. He gave the name to a journalist during an unclassified conversation. The journalist, working on stories about interrogation, sought details. Kiriakou provided the name of an officer involved in operations. The name then moved beyond the journalist to defense attorneys who sought to contact the officer for depositions. The government learned of the disclosure through legal filings. Prosecutors charged Kiriakou under Title 50, United States Code, Section 421, which criminalizes the intentional disclosure of covert identities. The plea agreement spared Kiriakou a trial. The government agreed to dismiss additional charges in exchange for the guilty plea and a recommended sentence of 30 months. At the plea hearing, Kiriakou admitted he knew the officer's status was classified, that he disclosed the name to an unauthorized person, and that he made false statements to the agency's pre-publication review process. The court accepted the plea. Defense counsel emphasized Kiriakou's military and intelligence service, his role in capturing high-value targets, and his family circumstances. Prosecutors noted the seriousness of identity disclosure and the need for deterrence. The judge imposed the agreed 30 months. Kiriakou served his sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Loretto, Pennsylvania. He was released in February of 2015. Since release, he has written about his experience and criticized the prosecution. He argues he was targeted for speaking about interrogation policies, not for malice. The government maintains the disclosure was criminal regardless of motive. The case illustrates the boundaries of protected speech. Discussing policy is lawful, naming covert personnel is not. The tradecraft fail was direct and undeniable. Kiriakou named a covert officer to someone without clearance or need to know. There was no encryption, no coded language, no attempt to mask the identity. The disclosure was explicit. The name moved through channels, journalists to attorneys to court filings, creating a public trail. Prosecutors had clear evidence. The plea was almost inevitable. Kiriakou's 30 months is the shortest term in this set. It reflects the plea posture, the absence of foreign intelligence involvement, and the single count of conviction. The sentence also reflects mitigation, prior service, absence of financial motive, and cooperation during the investigation. The contrast with Mallory and Lee is stark. Both received decades for selling information to China. Kiriakou received 2.5 years for disclosing a name to a journalist. The difference lies in recipient, volume, and intent. Courts weigh these factors. The Espionage Act allows for broad prosecution. Sentencing guidelines and judicial discretion produce the range. Should naming an officer ever be treated as less severe than document transfer? The Sterling and Kiriakou cases suggest the answer is yes. When the recipient is domestic, the motive is not financial, and the defendant cooperates. The question remains, does that principle hold when the disclosure enables adversaries, even indirectly, to identify and target sources? 13th of July, 2022. A jury in the Southern District of New York convicts Joshua Schulte on charges of espionage, computer hacking, contempt of court, making false statements, and possession of child abuse images. The espionage charges relate to the theft and transmission of classified cyber tools developed by the Central Intelligence Agency. The tools, known collectively as Vault 7, were published by WikiLeaks in March of 2017. The leak exposed hacking techniques, software vulnerabilities, and operational methods. The government described the disclosure as the largest theft of classified information in the agency's history. Schulte, a former software engineer in the agency's Center for Cyber Intelligence, was identified as the source. On 1st of February 2024, the court sentences him to 40 years in federal prison. The investigation began immediately after the WikiLeaks publication. Internal logs showed that Schulte had administrative-level access to the server where the tools were stored. Forensic analysis revealed that someone with his credentials had copied files, attempted to delete access logs, and modified permissions. Schulte's work computer showed evidence of unauthorized file transfers. His personal devices contained encrypted volumes. When investigators obtained warrants and decrypted the files, they found classified materials and evidence of the theft. Schulte denied involvement. He claimed he was being framed by colleagues. The trial proceeded in phases. The first trial, in 2020, ended in a mistrial on the espionage counts after the jury deadlocked. The government retried him in 2022. The second jury convicted on all counts. Prosecutors presented server logs, forensic reports, and testimony from agency personnel. The defense challenged the reliability of the logs and argued that multiple people had access to the system. The jury found the government's evidence convincing. The conviction was followed by post-trial motions. Schulte challenged the verdict, the evidence, and the conditions of his pretrial detention. The court denied relief. At sentencing, the government sought life imprisonment. Prosecutors described the damage. The tools had to be rebuilt, operations were compromised, and adversaries gained insights into American capabilities. Rebuilding the tools cost millions of dollars and required years of work. Defense counsel argued for a lower sentence, citing Schulte's lack of prior criminal history and his denial of intent to harm national security. The court rejected the argument. The judge noted the scale of the theft, the calculated nature of the conduct, and Schulte's lack of remorse. The sentence, 480 months, 40 years. Schulte remains in Bureau of Prisons custody. His detention includes restrictive conditions. Court filings reference special administrative measures limiting his communications. He has filed appeals. The case is pending in the Second Circuit. His projected release, absent successful appeal or clemency, is in the 2060s. The tradecraft failed because Schulte underestimated forensic capabilities. He believed deleting logs would hide his actions. He thought encryption would protect his files. Investigators recovered both. The logs showed access patterns. The encrypted volumes yielded classified files. The combination was damning. The digital trail, timestamps, user credentials, file transfer metadata told a clear story. The jury needed no physical documents. The server spoke. Schulte's 40-year sentence approaches Ames's life term in severity. The comparison is intentional. Prosecutors argued that the theft of cyber tools caused damage equivalent to human source compromise. The tools took years to develop. Their exposure forced costly rebuilds. The court agreed. The sentence reflects a policy judgment. Cyber espionage, when it undermines core capabilities, warrants punishment near the top of the range. When tools, not names, are exposed, should decades mirror human source cases? The Schulte sentence suggests the answer is yes, if the scale and cost are comparable. Appeals in national security cases follow familiar patterns. Defendants challenge evidentiary rulings, sufficiency of proof, jury instructions, and sentencing calculations. Appellate courts review trial records, read classified materials in secure facilities, and issue opinions that balance transparency with secrecy. Published decisions describe the legal reasoning. Classified appendices contain details that remain sealed. The Fourth Circuit, covering the Eastern District of Virginia, has developed expertise in these cases. The circuit's opinions in Mallory and Sterling illustrate the standards. In Mallory's appeal, defense counsel argued that the evidence of his intent to harm the United States was insufficient, that the CIPA procedures denied him a fair trial, and that the sentence was substantively unreasonable. The Fourth Circuit rejected each argument. The opinion, published in 2020, reviewed the recovered messages, the financial transfers, and the testimony about the sensitivity of the material Mallory accessed. The court found the evidence sufficient to support the jury's verdict. The CIPA procedures, the panel held, were properly applied. The trial court had reviewed classified evidence, issued protective orders, and allowed Mallory's counsel access to summaries. The sentence of 20 years, the circuit concluded, was within the guidelines range and reflected appropriate consideration of the statutory factors. The conviction and sentence were affirmed. Sterling's appeal raised similar issues. Defense attorneys challenged the sufficiency of the circumstantial evidence, the court's handling of the journalist's privilege, and the application of the Espionage Act to disclosures to the press. The Fourth Circuit upheld the conviction. The opinion, issued in 2016, explained that circumstantial evidence, phone records, email metadata, and timing can sustain a conviction when the pattern is sufficiently strong. The court noted that the government is not required to produce direct testimony from a journalist if other evidence establishes the defendant's guilt. The Espionage Act, the panel held, applies to unauthorized disclosures regardless of the recipient's status as a journalist. The First Amendment does not create an exception for leaks to the press. The conviction was affirmed. The sentence of 42 months was not challenged on appeal. Schulte's post-trial motions in the Southern District of New York challenged the verdict on multiple grounds. He argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that other individuals had access to the system, and that the jury instructions were flawed. The district court denied relief. The court found that the forensic evidence, server logs, file transfer records, and the encrypted files on Schulte's devices provided ample support for the verdict. The fact that others had access did not create reasonable doubt when the logs pointed to Schulte's credentials. The jury instructions, the court held, accurately stated the law. Schulte filed a notice of appeal. The case is pending in the Second Circuit. The pattern is consistent. Appellate courts afford trial judges deference on evidentiary rulings, defer to juries on credibility and weight, and rarely reverse national security convictions. The CIPA framework survives scrutiny. The use of classified evidence, reviewed in camera and presented to juries in summary form, has been upheld repeatedly. The Espionage Act's application to leak sales and cyber theft has been affirmed across circuits. The sentences, when within or near the guidelines ranges, are sustained. The cases also reveal the limits of appellate relief. Defendants argue that harm claims are speculative, that damage assessments are self-serving, and that mitigation was underweighted. Courts respond that the government need not prove specific deaths or quantify every dollar of damage. The sensitivity of the material, the identity of the recipient, and the volume of the disclosure are sufficient. Mitigation is considered, but deterrence and the seriousness of the offense often outweigh it. If appeals seldom change outcomes, where else can proportionality be tested? Guidelines, policy, or clemency? The answer, at the federal level, is almost nowhere. Presidential clemency for national security offenses is vanishingly rare. A corrections officer at the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, Oregon, files a report. The date is 2011. The report describes intercepted communications between inmate Harold James Nicholson and his adult son. The communications, coded in letters and phone calls, reference travel, meetings, and money. The FBI opens an investigation. Surveillance teams follow the son to Mexico City, Cyprus, and Peru. The son meets unidentified individuals. Cash changes hands. The son returns to the United States. Bank records show deposits. The investigation continues for months. Prosecutors eventually file charges. In December of 2010, a federal grand jury in the District of Oregon indicts Nicholson and his son on conspiracy to act as agents of a foreign government. The indictment alleges that Nicholson, while imprisoned, continued to provide information to Russian intelligence and used his son as a courier to collect payments. Both men plead guilty. At sentencing in January of 2012, the court imposes 96 months, 8 years, consecutive to Nicholson's existing term. The son receives a shorter sentence, which he has since completed. Nicholson's total sentence now exceeds 3 decades. The government's sentencing memorandum emphasizes deterrence. Prosecutors argue that Nicholson's conduct demonstrates a continuing threat, that he exploited family relationships to circumvent incarceration, and that a substantial consecutive term is necessary to prevent others from attempting similar schemes. Defense counsel responds that Nicholson had limited access to new classified information from prison, that his son was manipulated, and that adding 8 years to an already lengthy sentence is excessive. The court sides with the government. The opinion notes that Nicholson's willingness to involve his son, to continue conspiring despite imprisonment, and to accept payments from a foreign intelligence service warrants enhanced punishment. The case illustrates a principle. Post-conviction conduct can drive additional sentences. Nicholson was already serving more than 20 years. The new conspiracy added 8. The Bureau of Prisons updated his projected release date. Family members rarely appear in these cases as co-conspirators. Nicholson's son became one. The son traveled to foreign cities, met handlers, collected cash, and returned home. He deposited the money and transferred portions to his father's account. Prison monitors flagged the transactions. The FBI documented the travel. The case was strong. The plea was predictable. The aftermath is visible in policy. The Bureau of Prisons tightened monitoring of mail and phone calls for inmates convicted of espionage. Facilities reviewed communication logs more frequently. Financial institutions received guidance on flagging deposits linked to inmates. The Nicholson case became training material for counterintelligence officers. Incarceration does not end the threat. The question remains, should new conspiracies from custody face enhancements beyond consecutive time? Sentencing guidelines allow for upward departures based on post-offense conduct. Nicholson's case applied that principle. The 8-year addition reflects judicial discretion, prosecutorial recommendation, and the seriousness of the conduct. The precedent stands. Inmates who recruit family members or associates to continue espionage will face additional punishment. The deterrence message is clear. The policy consequence is tighter monitoring, longer sentences, and fewer opportunities for communication. A reporter's notes become evidence. The case is United States versus Sterling. The notes, never published in full, describe meetings, phone calls, and the substance of conversations with a confidential source. The source is Sterling. The notes include dates, times, and locations. The journalist refuses to testify. The government subpoenas phone records and email metadata. The records show dozens of calls between Sterling and the journalist during the period when the journalist was researching a book about Operation Merlin. The timing aligns with chapters in the published book. Prosecutors use the records to build a circumstantial case. The jury convicts. The appellate opinion addresses 2 questions: the sufficiency of circumstantial evidence and the boundaries of reporters' privilege. The Fourth Circuit holds that the government need not produce the journalist's testimony if other evidence, phone records, email logs, and timing, establishes the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The court reviews the pattern. Sterling had access to the classified operation. Sterling contacted the journalist during the research phase. The book was published with details that matched Sterling's knowledge, and Sterling lied to investigators about his contact with the journalist. The pattern, the court concludes, is sufficient. The conviction is affirmed. The Sterling case set a precedent. Metadata can sustain a conviction in national security prosecutions. The government need not present documents with the defendant's fingerprints, recordings of the defendant reading classified text, or direct witness testimony. A strong circumstantial case, contact, access, timing, and publication can meet the burden of proof. The precedent applies to future cases. Prosecutors in later investigations will rely on phone records, email headers, and travel logs. Defense attorneys will challenge the sufficiency. Courts will apply the Sterling standard. The case also frames harm in program risk terms, not graphic detail. The classified portions of the trial record describe the sensitivity of Operation Merlin, the potential for the disclosure to alert adversaries, and the damage to intelligence relationships. The public portions avoid specifics. Victims in this context are not individuals, but operations and capabilities. The court acknowledges the harm without detailing it. The balance reflects SIPA's purpose: protect secrets while allowing prosecution. The policy reflection is clear. When direct quotes are absent, metadata can still sustain conviction. The question for future cases is proportionality. If metadata suffices for conviction, what prevents overreach, and how should mitigation weigh that? Sterling's 42 months suggests one answer: when the recipient is domestic, when financial motive is absent, and when the disclosure involves policy critique rather than pure espionage, courts may impose terms measured in years rather than decades. The precedent permits conviction on circumstantial proof, but does not mandate maximum sentences. The balance, proof sufficient for guilt, discretion at sentencing, remains the standard. A Department of Justice press release marks the policy turn. The date is 1st of February 2024. The release announces Joshua Schulte's 40-year sentence. The language is direct. The theft represented the single largest data breach in CIA history. The release describes the tools stolen, the damage to operations, and the cost of rebuilding capabilities. It cites the need for deterrence. It frames the sentence as proportionate to the harm. The agency does not name specific operations compromised. It does not list countries that exploited the tools. The damage assessment remains classified. The public statement provides the outline. The sentence provides the consequence. After Ames, reforms followed. The Central Intelligence Agency implemented financial monitoring for officers with access to sensitive compartments. Banks reported large cash deposits. Credit agencies flagged unexplained debt relief. Lifestyle reviews became routine. Counterintelligence officers analyzed spending patterns. The tradecraft failure, conspicuous wealth, became a detection method. Ames's case taught the lesson. Subsequent cases showed the lesson learned. Mallory's debts triggered scrutiny. Lee's travel prompted surveillance. The financial red flags worked. After Nicholson, the Bureau of Prisons tightened communication monitoring. Inmates convicted of espionage faced enhanced mail review, recorded phone calls, and restricted visitation. Facilities developed protocols for coded language. Officers trained on recognizing patterns. The system adapted. Nicholson's prison-era conspiracy became a case study. The message: incarceration does not end the risk. The response: more monitoring, more restrictions, more oversight. After Schulte, the focus shifted to insider threats in cyber operations. Access controls tightened. Administrators faced additional scrutiny. Logging systems improved. Agencies invested in forensic tools capable of reconstructing deleted files, analyzing metadata, and tracing credential use. The lesson from Vault 7. Technical safeguards must match human security measures. The tradecraft failure, abusing admin privileges, drove the policy response. The 7 cases span 3 decades. The policy consequences are visible in training, in monitoring, in sentencing memoranda that cite earlier cases as benchmarks. Prosecutors invoke Ames when seeking life. They distinguish Kyriakou when explaining shorter terms. They compare Schulte to Ames when arguing that cyber theft can equal human source betrayal in severity. The case law builds. Each conviction, each sentence, each appellate opinion adds to the framework. The Espionage Act remains broad. The sentencing range remains wide. The factors, recipient, volume, harm, mitigation, produce the variation. Victims in these cases are often invisible. Human sources cannot be named. Operations cannot be detailed. Families of compromised assets remain anonymous. The memorial wall at the Central Intelligence Agency headquarters grows. Stars are added. Names for many remain classified even in death. The public sees the symbol, a star etched in marble. The agency sees the name. The courts see the damage assessment redacted and sealed. The balance, honor the fallen, protect the living, punish the betrayer, is maintained through silence and consequence. The sentencing spread tells the story. At one end, Aldrich Ames, life without possibility of parole. At the other, John Kyriakou, 30 months. Between them, Harold Nicholson, more than 3 decades with the consecutive term. Kevin Mallory, 20 years affirmed on appeal. Jerry Chun Xing Li, 19 years. Jeffrey Sterling, 42 months served. Joshua Schulte, 40 years. The range is vast. The factors are documented. Recipient matters. Foreign intelligence services draw harsher terms than journalists. Volume matters. Thousands of files weigh more than single disclosures. Harm matters. Compromised sources and destroyed tools justify decades. Mitigation matters. Service records, family circumstances, and cooperation reduce sentences at the margins. Intent matters. Selling for cash is treated more severely than leaking to expose alleged wrongdoing. Proportionality debates continue. Advocacy groups argue that the Espionage Act is too broad, that it punishes whistleblowers and spies alike, that it chills legitimate disclosure of government misconduct. Prosecutors respond that the act distinguishes based on evidence and intent, that courts have discretion at sentencing, and that national security requires robust enforcement. The case law reflects both views. Sterling's 42 months acknowledges the absence of foreign involvement. Mallory's 20 years reflects Chinese intelligence contact and financial motive. The same statute, different outcomes. Sentencing guidelines provide a starting point. The guidelines consider the classification level of the material, the number of documents, the identity of the recipient, and any obstruction. Departures are permitted for extraordinary mitigation or aggravation. Judges exercise discretion. The Fourth Circuit and Second Circuit have upheld sentences across the range, finding no abuse of discretion when the term falls within or near the calculated guideline range. The appellate standard, review for reasonableness, affords trial judges latitude. The result, similar conduct can produce different sentences based on the judge, the district, and the specific facts. Clemency at the federal level is rare. The Office of the Pardon Attorney processes petitions. The Deputy Attorney General reviews them. The President decides. Between 2000 and 2020, presidents granted clemency to fewer than 500 individuals per term. Most grants involved nonviolent drug offenses. National security cases are almost never granted relief. The deterrence rationale is strong. The political cost is high. No president in recent decades has commuted a sentence for espionage. The petitions are filed. The denials are routine. The system offers little hope for those serving long terms. The policy question remains, what feels proportionate? If Ames's life term reflects the extreme, executed sources, millions in payments, 9 years of betrayal, how should courts measure lesser cases? Sterling disclosed operational details to a journalist. He received 42 months. Schulte stole cyber tools and gave them to WikiLeaks. He received 40 years. The comparison invites debate. Is cyber theft comparable to human source betrayal? The Schulte court said yes. Other courts may disagree. The law allows for both outcomes. The guidelines provide structure. Judicial discretion fills the gaps. The marble wall at the Central Intelligence Agency headquarters bears stars for officers killed in the line of duty. Some stars have names etched beneath. Others remain anonymous. The wall grows. The dates span decades. The conflicts vary. the sacrifice is constant. The 7 cases in this narrative compromised operations, endangered sources, and forced costly repairs. The sentences reflect judicial attempts to measure harm, assign culpability, and deter future breaches. The Wall reminds, behind every prosecution, there are lives at risk. Behind every sentence, there are consequences beyond the courtroom.